I want to go to a movie that is about something larger than life.
This intimate view of an epic sort of story and epic scale.
We're gonna make an enormous monster movie, but we don't have the resources that we would normally have.
It's one of those insane roller coaster rides.
We have to virtually destroy Manhattan.
It's fast and it's intense.
Take genre, add monster equals my favorite movie of all time.
Anytime you went to a full green screen area, you were in complete digital land and you could do anything. You could bridge things because you were in a space that was going to be created all afterwards.
You have to have your foreground and kind of your midground as a real place, and then you can do whatever you want in your background.
We knew we were going to have to throw the Liberty head down the street and then have that interact with everything in the street.
We had to do a lot of creative thinking in terms of how the statue would look. Everyone that looked at it thought it should look a specific way. In the end, it's a sort of a distillation of a lot of different people's ideas. The only reason it looks so good is because of having lots of people wanting to see version after version after version. In the movie, we have a full frame shot of the Statue of Liberty head.
We took as many photographs as we could so that we could recreate it as a 3D set.
What we can do in the computer is have three-dimensional models physically interact with clouds of digital smoke that inherit a three-dimensional space, in this case the Woolworth Tower. So the way the building will then collapse will determine the sort of swirls and motion of the smoke and debris. A fluid simulation is a way of simulating physical properties of materials.
Once we have a good dynamic simulation for the compositors, we render the smoke and fire with different light colors. Each color is a different direction of the light.
We had to build this destroyed city, and we added in matte-painted buildings and fire and flames from practical elements.
It's certainly the iconic image of the film. Seeing the head of the Statue of Liberty was shocking and surprising, and I even knew it was coming.
We started shooting first in a green screen space when we were shooting the Brooklyn Bridge. We were basically on this section of bridge that had been constructed that was surrounded all by green.
We built the top portion of the Brooklyn Bridge, just like the wood and the railing, but we really only had maybe 10 feet of the railing was actually detailed.
We built a little section of the bridge walkway. It was only really the planks that people stand on.
We just knew that whatever we set up and started rolling, we had to be perfect about it. We had to get it exactly right.
Here we go, we're rolling.
We didn't know how much footage we'd actually be able to get. We took our cameras on the bridge and we were able to get much more than we thought we were able to get. And the level of reality that brought into it, now the bar has just risen for the visual effects people.
What we had to do was develop a modular system that allowed us to build 20-foot sections of bridge, and it would essentially repeat.
We had a very high model, which is this. So everything is built individually. There's little environment things like the benches, the lights, things that are actually on the bridge itself.
There are moments when we look around and we tip off the side of the bridge and we're a foot away from the railings, and it's all computer generated. The approach to the bridge, that was shot on location, so it meant that we had really good reference for the way that the bridge needed to look, the way that the cityscape in the background looked, and the lens qualities that you get when you shine a helicopter spotlight into the lens. All of this stuff we had great reference for, but what we didn't have reference for was the bridge falling over.
Initially, it was supposed to be a giant hand that came and smashes the bridge. And then when we put it together, we realized it looked kind of silly to have a giant hand. It was too deliberate. We wanted to make it look more accidental, so JJ's idea was to use the tail. We had practical water on set that gets dumped on all the actors, and then everyone looks up at the same time, and then the camera just goes nuts because the bridge has been smashed. There's bits of wood flying up, little digital people are flying around, stuff like that.
We also had to do a few shots where the cables, in reaction to what the bridge was doing, would break apart and fall into the water.
Cables on the bridge pulled on the stanchion at the back, so as the cables pulled, bits of masonry flew out of the stanchions. This is the front element in place now as well. So you can see all the bits of wood splintering up. You can just see through the back there all the stanchion being destroyed.
So as we're following the people running away from the bridge collapsing behind us, the cables are slowly unraveling and snapping.
The way you conceive something like this is you previs it. This is the most important thing.
Previsualization is used for a conceptual tool to initially figure out what is in the director's brain, what is he thinking that he wants to see ultimately be on screen.
We had terrific previs guys. They worked out a lot of great shots with us, but then you'd get on the set and things would all change.
We're going to be shooting different elements like drive-bys of ambulances, drive-bys of Humvees, drive-bys of tanks, everything shot against the blue screen. So then we'll be comping them in and populating our shots.
Okay, and action, Rob.
The key on this film was to make sure that the backgrounds that we did were invisible to the viewer. The premise behind this shot is that we want the audience to think that they're just walking down the street having a conversation. By putting a realistic background, we wind up getting a shot that doesn't spark anyone's interest or doesn't pique anyone's interest until all of a sudden they do see the giant monster.
In order to do it so flawlessly, I mean, tracking is...
It's called match moving, duplicating a camera that existed in the real world and following its motions exactly in a CG environment so that when you overlay something that's digital, everything syncs together and lines up and moves as one.
They go out and they shoot points of every piece of structure, architecture that they can out in the field.
I surveyed all the sets and provided that data to DNAG and to us here at Tippett. These are all the points that I've surveyed. Survey lining up the actual image. Then we go in and build curves and then use those curves to build up surfaces. And then once that's all done, we use that and overlay it with the actual plate that we use for the shot. As soon as the PG element and the film start sliding against each other, it's very quick and easy for the human eye to pick up that something's wrong.
This is the before version that was actually shot on set. This is the shot as is completely rendered by the computer. Nothing you see here is real. This is all completely computer generated.
Clover comes from behind the street in the crossfire. He's getting just hammered with rockets. It's the first time we really see Clover clearly in the movie. Now we have to destroy everything. We have to fill it with rockets, and we have to fill it with tracer bullets, and we have to fill it with fire. Once those pieces are in place, everything's starting to come together for the final composite. And it's the last step of the pipeline, and the compositor is responsible for taking everything and sort of matching everything into the place so it looks as photoreal as possible. Then you have a gigantic monster walking down the street getting shot at with tracer bullets, and rockets and buildings explode, and the hand comes down, and big bits of concrete grow up right before the heroes go in the subway.
The subway scene developed primarily through our search for locations. We found this loading dock, and that loading dock had a very long, expansive tunnel. One shot in particular that I really wanted to get, we ended up nailing in the previs, which was just the idea that when the night vision turned on, that you would see the creatures on the ceiling, and you'd have this sense that Rob, in total darkness, has no idea of what's behind him.
Michael Stahl David comes in and he's like all completely blown out because he's like right in front of these lights, he's right in front of the camera. He set the focus past Michael, who was like about half the frame, onto the parasites on the ceiling.
When it was shot, there was no parasites at all, of course, in there. They were in an environment, a non-green screen environment. We basically used Title Tool in the Avid to make X's that were representative of the parasites and how they moved and speed and how they attacked.
We built a parasite puppet It showed them what the creature looked like and what it was like when the jaw would come snatching at their faces or at their legs, and they would see the claws and all of those things.
The scene became much more interactive with the characters and required more animation than the puppet was capable of doing.
It's always better to shoot stuff on the set if you can get it. But I think these guys were moving so fast and so crazy that we just decided it'd be better to just try to do everything digitally. It's like any other shot, the first we have to match move and then we have to reconstruct the plates, as this entire sequence was one long continuous shot, but obviously shot over multiple takes. So we had to stitch all the plates together, decide where we were going to make our internal cut points, and start animating, put the bugs in, and we had to kind of figure out how they were going to move, and we have to make sure that they're, it's going to look good when it's finally put together.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh my God.
The rooftop was a big challenge. It was all shot green screen stage at Downey Studios. Designers had built a very, very small area of the roof. We needed to expand the whole rooftop and also see the whole of New York behind them, the whole of this enormous cityscape.
The first step is essentially we get the plates in from the client. We've got tracking markers all on the walls, and we end up just 2D tracking all the points in the background and foreground. We end up doing a lot of hand tracking on it within Maya. Here we're looking at a replica of this rooftop. This is the building that they stand in at the beginning of the shot, and they walk up the roof and into a doorway here. So we just built all this set extension on the side.
We needed to get a vantage point in New York City where we could actually see a full 360-degree view of everything from above. That data that we collected would allow us to rebuild in the computer. On the right-hand side is the plate that was shot for us, and you can see all the green screen and the masking, which is essentially where we're going to have to add in building later on. And if you look at the left-hand side of the frame, you can see additional aircon units that we've added in, the extended roof stretching off, and additional details such as the hole in the floor. There's always something moving in the plate. There's fires and sparks off in the distance. The idea that Matt always wanted to try and convey here was a sense of danger.
Okay? Come on, we can hit this far. We can do it. I'll go first.
Okay,
right?
okay, yes. Be careful.
I'll document it.
They cross over on the roof and climb down and get into Beth's apartment. So Martin built an apartment that was canted.
I had to build it on a pit because I needed depth for the green screen, so it's over a ledge actually on the stages in Downey.
The green screen, you're presented with mainly foreground material. The main actors are in it. And you just have to sort of imagine what's happening in the background of it.
You see the lines, the grid lines, a sort of Tron render. That's the match move, and that basically will show us, where the edges of our computer-generated buildings, for example, will land against the real buildings. So theoretically, we should be able to watch these grid patterns sitting, and matching exactly the same way.
One of the also added shot at the end was the parasites in the hallway when Rob saves Beth.
A friend of mine actually came up to me and he said, you got to get the parasites in there one more time because those guys, they're amazing. Once we'd finished everything and come in on budget and actually under budget, we were like, well, I bet we could get one more little scare. And it's a brief little scare.
Our heroes are racing to the landing site, and at one point, these rockets fly over their head, double negative, put in these rockets and explode a building off to their right, so now they have to run to the left.
This is just what we call a play blast, so it's just a useful way of us presenting ideas to the director. So here you can just see some of the variations in the ideas. This is the taxi being hurled down the street. Here's idea 2, where the military vehicle collides with the taxi. But this is the eventual chosen idea of the rockets impacting with buildings on the right-hand side of frame, which is a good enough reason for most people to want to turn left. A lot of the stuff that we do to shots like this, for example, is once we've added in explosions, we need to then integrate them back into the shots.
They're basically rushing up to the landing zone, the getaway point. They stopped and looked to the left, and we pan over, and there's Grand Central Station.
The Chrysler Building was in the background, the MetLife Building was in the background, and Grand Central Station. So it's all these really amazing New York icons. Plus Clover, the giant 300-foot-tall monster, is right there. He's turning around, and while doing that, he puts his head through another building. And the effects animators will actually build a digital building complete with steel beams and girders and bits of furniture and glass. And layer by layer, they'll actually destroy this building. So they'll find the part where the head moves through the building and smash it to pieces.
Working on a small layer like this, I was able to start layering elements on top of it, such as the windows and then floors and debris inside the building, also the building's roof.
Once the building starts to collapse, there's all this smoke and debris that kind of comes out of the bottom of the building. So many layers, and this was a massive shot, and one of our favorite shots to work on. It's a big, iconic shot. It's really great.
The camera pans over to the left, and you see the tank there, and then this giant foot comes in, and the monster's walking backwards, and he steps on the tank, and then whip off again, start running, and look up, and then we tilt down again, and we're at Downey.
We could go and set up helicopters landing and soldiers on the parking lot at Downey Studios, and they shot the whole scene there.
This is the clean plate as we received it. It's got the tracking points over the surface, so it makes it easier for the trackers to get a good grip on it so we can match a camera to it.
We added in the geometry for the cityscape. The helicopter door was a fully CG helicopter door, and the dirt on the lens. The idea here is that the monster is just off to the right of frame. We picked a big truck, threw it in, and put in big explosions.
We had to model and rig the truck so that it'd brake correctly. We had to make a path of destruction that involved breaking up the bridge and figuring out which elements were going to move so we can see what things are actually going to look like. We got some 2D shots and some actual 3D elements of explosions, and we composited them all together to build up the shot as you see it in the film.
Oh my God! Are you guys seeing this right now? Are you seeing this right now? Look!
We see this shot from the POV of our heroes managing to just get out of Manhattan just in time, and as they're looking back, they finally get to see this thing that has been pursuing them.
The first thing we had to do was kind of show everybody how this monster is going to move. How does a gigantic 350-foot monster move through the streets of Manhattan? We created a short test to show everybody this is kind of what it's going to be like.
The visual effects supervisor had to go up in a helicopter, and he had to shoot this whole area of New York. We delivered it to Tippett, and then they had to stitch it together.
We actually used that in the match move to create a 3D city.
It took them a long time to put it together. You have 3D elements, bombs, glass shattering, a monster who's being bombed at, and his texture is different, his movement is different, he's being animated differently, he's walking differently.
We have to virtually destroy Manhattan, and then we have to completely fill it with destruction and smoke and bombs and explosions and a giant monster that's get taken down, and as he falls down, he rips open the side of a building. We stare at him, the smoke, for a while, and then just when you think he's dead, he lunges at us, and it turns out he is alive and takes down our heroes.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking.
The way the element was shot, we had them in the helicopter just in a set, and then, they had to move the helicopter. And the way Matt Reeves shot it, the movement worked very well.
We had the job of putting in the environment around it, and we've simulated it as if it was in free fall, 360-degree, out-of-control spin, eventually getting to this patch of ground which looms faster and faster, closer and closer to the camera. The last 3 frames, you get mud and all of the debris from the helicopter coming into the cockpit.
Oh no!
We were facing Central Park South, and it crashes in Central Park. It was an already wrecked helicopter, double negative, and it ended up putting a bunch of smoke and fires, and the Essex House are in the trees and stuff. So that was just a big field out in Santa Clarita.
The 11th hour, after everything was done, JJ had the idea of actually seeing the monster, really seeing the monster up close.
It was supposed to be a very quick shot where HUD picks up the camera, turns behind him, and the monster comes down and eats him.
It was just supposed to be a very fast, very sudden kind of scare moment.
Neville had this really amazing design, and he created a couple of still images to show JJ and the gang what this thing would look like. What does a 30-story monster look like in Manhattan? Well, the first thing we had to do was a modeler had to sit down, make a 3D version of that model. From there, that model goes to Gus. Gus is then going to basically paint him as if he were painting a real maquette, a real sculpture.
Then I started to create dirt maps, and the dirt maps are it's going to sell it. It's going to give it life.
Well, he starts with the base color. He starts with all the little indentations, all the little slimy details. We want to put dents on his teeth and make him look all ragged. Once the animators have something to start animating with, we go back and actually build a muscle simulation guy.
We take Neville's sculpture in the computer and go in and add joints and bones inside of it so that someone can take a piece of an arm or a piece of a leg and move it and set it into a position.
In addition to just sort of moving the joints around, when Clover does a big plant, because he's so big, you want to really read that mass. All of his muscles will move around and jiggle.
Run it through the same performance that adds extra things that you'd see on something that would take a little too long to sit and animate by hand.
Once he's animated and in the right space, the next step is to light him digitally. We backlit it, put some schmutz on the lens. We went in and out of focus because the camera was trying to find focus and things like that. It was an amazing opportunity for our animators to just sort of get this really amazing, intimate performance with the monster. It was a huge, huge undertaking, but it was definitely worth it.
The challenges of making the film were so fresh that it was very exciting.
It took an incredible leap of faith on behalf of the studio to entrust us to take something that was so big.
We know that there are no monsters in New York, but it looks great and it looks real.
We wanted to try and make it feel as real as possible, and as if, a monster attacked your city and you happen to have a camera and you grabbed it and ran outside, this is what you would have captured. I think we did it.
Hey, it's Lisa here with some behind-the-scenes trivia. Now, the first recorded use of special effects as we know them was done in 1857 by Oscar Rieslander. He took 30 different photo negatives and combined them into a single image. This was the first example of the montage print. Now, if you haven't already done it, remember to click here below to subscribe or on the side for more great content.